So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This autumn at Sharjah Art Foundation, we have a very busy program with 8 solo and group exhibitions, the second edition of Focal Point, our annual art book fair, the second edition of Sharjah Film Platform, and over 130 education workshops and courses. Tonight marks the opening of 2 exhibitions, 32, The Rescore, the second annual Air Arabia Curator in Residence exhibition, and Akram Zaatari Against Photography, an Annotated History of the Arab Image Foundation. It's been a great pleasure to work with Musée d'Art Contemporain de Barcelona and the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Korea on the realization of this important exhibition in Sharjah. Photography has always been a medium of interest to the foundation. We have presented exhibitions that focus on the work of photographers from the region and around the world. This year, we had the 7th edition of our annual photography exhibition, Vantage Point Sharjah, which is still on view, and you can see it in the gallery next door. Photography often features in the biennial, as well as our education and community programs. The exhibition, Akram Zaatari Against Photography, continues and builds on our support for this medium. Since 1995, Akram's practice has been centered around photography. The photographs can represent nostalgia, historical objects, underrepresented or forgotten histories, artworks, family heirlooms, and more. Akram co-founded the Arab Image Foundation in 1997 in order to research, collect, archive, and share photographs within an institutional framework. We hope this show will expand our collective understanding of what photography means and the discussions and debates it can inspire. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Akram Zaatari and the exhibition curator, Hiuwai Chu, to the stage.
Thank you very much. Before starting, I would like to thank Sheikha Hoor Qasimi and the staff at Sharjah Art Foundation for inviting us. It's a great pleasure to be here and have the exhibition in its 4th and final iteration in Sharjah. Akram and I have been working together since the last 5 years on this project, and which is entitled Against Photography, an Annotated History of the Arab Image Foundation. And I want to take that as a framework now for the conversation because as the title of the talk is on collecting, preserving, and the archival impulse, I wanted to start about talking about the idea about collecting in regard to the Arab Image Foundation. For those of you who are not familiar with the foundation, it was co-founded by Akram Zaatari, Fuad al-Khoury, and Sama Moghad in 1997, as we just heard. And it was a time in post-war Lebanon in which there was no visual history, really, that came from the region. And for my question to you, really, what was the impetus and the impulse for you to start this collecting, researching?
It's a long time ago. It's really a long time ago. But for those of you who don't know Lebanon in the 90s, the war was over. All of a sudden, there was a civil society that was eager to form. And the possibilities of creating non-governmental organizations was clear in the horizon. So in 1997, not only the Arab Image Foundation was created, but the Aylul Festival, which is an important festival for contemporary arts, took place only for 5 or 6 years. And both of them shared the same legal type of associations. So me, Fuad, and Samer, we were interested in writing the history of photography very innocently in the Arab world, and while doing so, we thought it's important to create a collection of samples. So what we are trying to do in the first 3-4 years is sampling existing forms of photographic records or photographic documents, namely family photography, what we call then amateur photography, all types of vernacular forms in which different types of professionals used photographs or resorted to photographs to produce work, starting from studio photographs and going through architects, all types of records, horseback riding records, for example, where photographs are very important.
I think,
yeah.
just to interrupt, one of the distinguishing features of the AIF as opposed to other photographic archives is that there is an artistic drive behind it, and most people refer to the Arab Image Foundation as a photographic archive, but it's a term, the term archive is a term that you and other members have shied away from. And when you speak about the archive, you refer to it as an archive not necessarily of photographic objects or documents, but rather an archive of photographic, of collecting practices. And so, tell us about the importance of that.
The Arab Image Foundation is not a place for photography, it's a place for collecting. This is how I see it. So the mechanism that we created is a collecting mechanism, and it's not a photographing mechanism. In a newspaper, when you hire 100 photographers to take pictures every day, you are creating a photographic archives. But in the framework of an organization where the main practice is collecting, what you're creating is an archive of collecting practices. But I like also to play with, just to give the Arab Image Foundation a flavor or a trait that it doesn't share with other archives. So this is why it's not, I like to say, to tease people that this is not an archive of photographs. No, this is a sedimentation of so many years of collecting where individuals traveled from Beirut to Baghdad or from Paris to Palestine or from Beirut to Jordan or to Cairo or to Senegal, etc., etc., etc. And they carried with them their own concerns and their own subjectivity in selecting pictures because, again, it's about sampling. We could not easily bring a whole archive of a family or a professional from Amman or Cairo or Alexandria to Beirut. We did not have the means. We needed to convince people to donate images. So from an archive of 1,000, we would select 5, 10, 100 based on subjectivity of the person. This is where collecting is extremely important in the history of the foundation today. Because it no longer happens. This is very specific of the first 7 years, I would say, of the foundation. And after that, it was an attempt to institutionalize, to organize, to work on several programs to make these accessible to others, etc.
You say it no longer happens, so the collecting practices, this active research and going to houses or studios, it's something that's in the foundation's history. Is the foundation still open to collecting? What are its drives at the moment?
I mean, I don't represent the foundation. I'm no longer a member of the foundation this year. So this really ends a history of 20 years for the foundation and for me as well. But the foundation is definitely still interested in engaging with photography and with collecting, but maybe on different grounds. And I would leave this to the foundation to define.
And when we think about collecting, we think about accumulation, and of course, this endless accumulation, there needs to be space for it, there needs to be a protocol in terms of preservation. I mean, this is something that was kind of acquired knowledge, learning by doing, or did you have a framework adapted from other archives?
In the early years, it was economy. We knew that if we needed to reproduce 1,000 images, that would cost us, to give back to the owners, we would need $3,000 because it was $3 per image to reproduce. So for us, the economic necessity was primary in defining what we're doing, in dictating even measures. And I always say it's an accident that the foundation happened. It exists by accident. It's a lucky one. It's an autonomous organization nowadays. It has a future to go. Yeah.
So backtracking to the first projects the first artistic projects that were generated by the foundation, there were much more artists being curators, kind of approaching making exhibitions, showing photographs in a, let's say, conventional way, printed, framed, etc. I would say the turning point in the archival approach to the artistic archival approach to the AIF is a project that you did with Walid Rad, which is called Mapping Sitting, in which the authorship was very much transferred to the both of you as artists, and you approached photography in a completely different way than purely, let's say, anthropological or curatorial way.
This is definitely, I would agree, but this is the easy way, because today I would claim every time a picture is reproduced, it's reauthored by an artist or a scholar or a technician or an X-ray. Every transaction is a reauthoring of some sort. When the maker or the operator claims to be an artist, then it's all of a sudden elevated and seen differently. That's interesting. It's interesting. Maybe it has to do with the idea of branding in the art world, but I would take this as an interesting problematic. But to go back to Mapping Sitting, the reason why people all of a sudden saw us as artists is because we scanned tons of images and put them, made videos with them, and we kind of worked with the elastic side of our being artists and reproduced them in unpredictable ways. They were not photographs that were framed and put on a wall, but they were a stream of photographs that were bombarding the viewers and just generating something else. So all of a sudden, the archive belonged to the present, clearly so. To the present because the voice that was delivering it, the means, the channels, the media were belonging to the times, but also the reasoning, the logic behind that presentation. I don't know how many have seen it. This is a project that we did in 2002, started in Brussels and then traveled quite a bit internationally for 5 or 6 years in Oslo, Sao Paulo, Berlin. Really, more than 12 locations in a few years. And then we were tired of showing it over and over, so we brought it back to Lebanon and simply buried it.
Just to probe the issue of authorship a little bit more, you did that project in 2002, which was then followed, I don't remember the year, I think 2004, where you started to work with the photographs of the photographer Hashim al-Madani, a photographer from Saida, your hometown, a studio photographer, and you, I don't know if I want to use this term, appropriated a lot of his work within your own artwork in many different formats, in a conventional photographic display, but also in filmic presentations. How was that relationship, and how did he receive the idea of you making artwork from his photographs?
Yeah, I mean, in 2004, I think I was in a conversation with Walid in 2005 at the Grey Art Gallery in New York, where we showed that work, and we said, okay, it's really humbling to see the reactions to people at Mapping Sitting, but if we were to criticize it, where do we start? I mean, I think I was never interested in breaking up images, bombarding people with images in what looked really like MTV style. I did not belong to that. And I'm more in a reflective mode of looking at photographs that is based in stillness, really. And I mean, also with the difference between me and Walid is like, I have met the people who produced the images. I met the people who I took images from. I've seen the albums before taking the images out, and I've seen them after taking the images out. So I'm really an archaeologist. Maybe later I would call myself an anthropologist. Today I would say I'm a historian who bases himself on images. So I tried to work in such a way that I call performative, in the sense that I go back and forth to location, and I'll see how the work informs location, how the work informs the home, the album, the photographer. And with Madani, it's a long way. I met Madani in 1999, and I kept on going to his studio almost weekly for more than 10 years. And I was accompanying him throughout his old age, trying to deal with a profession that ceased to exist. I met, even at the height of the recognition that his work and mine got internationally, no one ever would go to his studio. All my friends who know Madani through my work would never go to his studio, really. So it never turned him bitter, but he is someone who stayed there waiting, going to the studio for 2 hours every day, waiting for me to come. Every other day he would call me, say, "Are you coming?" I said, "No, today I can't, but I can come tomorrow or after tomorrow." I think for him, I talk about Second Life in the film that I made about Madani, 28 Nights and Poem, which is screening at Cinema Aqil on Sunday in the evening. This is a film that was shot in 8 years. And over time, you see how Madani is intrigued by the technology that I bring. One time I brought an iPad and I put it next to the frames so there is a performative aspect of me and him. And I talk about Second Life because I truly believe in the continuity. Preservation is not about preserving paper and ink and paint. No, preservation is belonging to the value of conservation, to the values of continuity through time. And this is why I don't see my work as appropriation. It's a natural community of a studio life. Studios inherited other studios all the time throughout the history of late 19th century until today. So as long as we agreed on that with Madani, as long as his share could actually, his financial share from that project could make him live the rest of the last 20 years of his life decently, then why not?
You talk about emotional preservation, and there are 2 films that are in the exhibition that probe actually the Arab Image Foundation in a critical way, perhaps the first film less critical than the last, about the idea of preservation. And you have talked about the idea of a radical preservation using today's technology to be able to make a sort of affective preservation, returning the photographs back to their owners to restore those memories and histories, and keeping the scan. Was that a true proposal that you made to the foundation?
Okay, let me go back. I mean, I always compare between the state of archaeology in the 19th century and the state of photography now, vernacular photography now. In the 19th century and early 20th century, it was really, really hard to keep archaeological facts in their locations. Otherwise, someone will come and steal them, loot them, try to sell them. People were so much aware of the value of these pieces. Yet, taking them away from their location is a very violent gesture. I wish we could live with the archaeology that we see at the Louvre, at the British Museum, Metropolitan Museum. I wish we could see it in their original locations, but it was no longer possible. And I don't know if it's the market that created this. I don't know which one came first. Is it the desire of the market or the market? So by desiring something, to which extent do we allow to actually pick it from its location and take it somewhere else? I mean, as kids, you know that the precious things at home kids are not allowed to touch. So you have a precious object that is almost in a vitrine that is actually useful, but no one is allowed to touch it, but because it's too precious. Can anyone drink from a cup that is made 3,000 years ago that has scars? No, it's hard to really. You should take it out of use in a way. That's the claim of the museum. I claim things differently. I say always, like, the museum may not be the natural habitat of archaeology. We may invent other types of spaces, and I wish the Arab Image Foundation was tuned to explore these in a more reflective way. It's an open debate, really. And on photography, people in modern times try to bring this problematic. This is why there are two screens. A screen where you see people touching with their own hands their pictures, showing them to us, to the camera. And in other term, on the other screen, a conservator with gloves touching pictures that are really not that ancient. They are 30 or 40 years old, but in a conservation institute, within a clear scientific conservation program, you are not allowed to add any scars to an image. The image, once the image comes to the Arab Image Foundation, it has like a number of scars, a number of defects, and we should lock this or seal it. We should seal it, and from there on, it's touched with gloves. It's hiding in a cool storage room, away from humidity, away from light. It's exactly like mummifying a human being in order to preserve it longer. And a human being needs to live, needs to breathe, needs to pee, needs to do so many things. And it's this clinical environment that I criticize, not the Arab Image Foundation, in my own practices, really. So I was turning, and I wanted the Arab Image Foundation to turn with me, but the foundation has become an institution not easily twistable, not easily changeable. It has people on its board who have a voice as well. So this is why I started taking distance and inventing things on my own. And in this exhibition, you don't see any original. It's a joy to be able to engage with the plasticity allowed in the art world, basing yourself on existing things, and try to bring that debate through an art form, almost faking the original.
I mean, speaking about debates and talking about photography, we naturally think of images. I mean, it is called the Arab Image Foundation, but there is a point in the photography's history, in the foundation's history, and within your own work, where the image part of the photography takes a back seat. I'm referring to privileging other aspects of the photographic object as opposed to the actual image itself. And there is a moment in the History Foundation where a drawer of photographs, rolls of film were found, and there was a debate about what to do, whether to develop the film, see what was on it, or whether this drawer, in fact, with the closed film, all the annotations, had a value in itself. Can you speak about this?
Yeah, sure. I brought these set of drawers with 35 millimeter films packed in them. I got them from a photographer in Tripoli named Arabi, who actually inherited them as a gift from another photographer named Photojak. And they were so beautiful. And me and Walid, we simply photographed them as is because they radiated with a certain order. They told you immediately time has been through these drawers and left all these inscriptions. They were so beautiful. And we did not know how to unpack them, how to present them. So we only photographed them from top. And the foundation also did not find a way to do it. And luckily, we did not have the means to open all of them and scan all of them. So they stayed as sculptures, as 5 different drawers. And now the foundation actually does not want to detach them. I think we are lucky that we did not have a solution, so we did not do anything with them until today. So nowadays, it's up to the foundation to decide what to do, but I don't think they're detaching them. They are like a fabric, like a set of rushes that someone did in like 100 years ago that reached a museum today that decided to keep them together and not cut them in pieces and mix them with other rushes coming by from other locations.
In this idea carries
I'm saying this because naturally collections within the Arab Image Foundation would be kept together, but somewhere in 2008, with the development of the institution and with the help, because we sought also the help of people who are specialized in conservation, who advised the foundation that all these different collections should be broken up and should be reorganized in boxes according to sizes. So this did not happen to these films. Otherwise, these films would not have stayed in the drawers. What would have happened to these films is that they would have been cut in pieces and would have been inserted in sleeves, transparent sleeves, would have been put in folders like the Madani archives, for example, where you would navigate through them by simply lifting the pages one after the other. Luckily, we did not know what to do with them, and they did not follow that organizational proposal, let's say.
No, I wanted to follow that thought up to present day and your more recent works that push it a step further in terms of looking at photography as an object, not so much as an image, but rather as an object. And there are some of the images you'll see, some of the works in the exhibition that you'll see, which don't have images at all. And this goes back to your interest in archaeology, the way you've approached your projects, different ones, but how you've treated photography itself as an archaeological practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true. I mean, archaeology made me, not archaeology as a science of studying past lives. It's more archaeology as a violent practice that seized finds and tried to reconstruct them in a contemporary, because the museum is a contemporary invention. It's so when I was reading the diaries of Osman Hamdi Bey, who's this Ottoman official who came to excavate, he is, by the way, an artist, a painter, who was in a position to go and excavate for the Ottoman Empire. And when I read his diaries, he talks about finding bits and pieces of sarcophagi. But when you go to Istanbul and look at them, they were reassembled. No one tells you which part was broken when. And for me, that's really important. I would have loved to see them as is and do the reassembling somewhere else, but I would have, like, it's as violent to reconstruct a broken sarcophagus as breaking it. It's, so you realize that the museum did not respect the debris, wanted to erase the debris and reconstruct the original from the original debris. And I thought it's interesting, at least it informed me a lot about about my relationship to photographs, because photographs are not images. They are images and something else. Photographs are not only images in the sense mental images or digital files. No, photographs have a weight, have a physical state, and sometimes they're broken, exactly like archaeological facts are broken. And
I like how you
they're
say
bricks.
It, just to interrupt you, that what defines a photograph, it's not the moment that it's taken, but rather the history afterwards.
Totally. It's
as
like
we're not defined the moment we are born, but rather the history that we live. No?
Yeah, and that's thanks to Lisa Steele, who did an amazing film, The Birthday Suit, where she talks about herself only through the scars. She doesn't tell you her religion. She doesn't tell you what did she study in school. She doesn't mention identity politics. She only mentions the scar and she dates every scar in her body. So this is how history records itself on an object. Imagine yourself being an object. If you ask me who I am, I mean, I can tell you I'm born in 1966, but so many things happened since 1966 to me, formed me. So a photograph is not simply the same photograph when it's born. Things happen to it. It was hanging in a gallery. It was bought by a collector. It was taken to an auction, and all of this adds to its record. And as a historian, I'm obliged to go through all these records. They are equally important. So I can no longer see a picture by identifying the people in it. I need to look at the back. I need to observe the discoloring. I need to see what splash of coffee, who spelled this coffee, when, etc. So, and this opens up a historical path, multiple historical paths, amazingly.
I'm told we have 5 minutes left, and I'm going to change the topic to the title of the exhibition, Against Photography, which seems like a quite radical stance, because when one thinks of the word against, automatically one thinks in opposition to, which is not what we mean here. But I want you to explain to the audience today.
I mean, luckily in English, French, and Spanish, the term is as thick, as versatile. You have something, you look at something against the background. So it's not really this. In Arabic, it's so violent, ضد التصوير. But I did not want this term to be translated in that way. It's في مقابل التصوير. It is a support, something. Yes, I lean against the wall helps me stand. Trading apples against oranges, etc., etc. And so the term is quite rich in English, and sadly in Arabic it's not as rich. This is why I kept the term as في مقابل. But again, I cannot claim that I do not have a take on photography and its history, because I do have that as well. It's the same take that I would have against a conservation institute that takes a music partition and conserves it as paper and ink. A music partition is not ink and paper. It needs to conserve differently. It needs to be played. It needs to be played on a violin, on a piano, etc., etc. And this is where the element of performance comes in to my support, to support me. With performance, you can read images better, you can read your history better, you can replicate, you can restage, you can remake, you can intervene in the copying of an image. You can take a shadow out of the picture and transform the picture into something else. You can read the surface of a photograph with a blind scanner, like I did with the work entitled Against Photography, and reproduce it as a blind emboss, forgetting about the image and just reprinting the texture. And this performative attitude that I got thanks to Yoko Ogawa's, the brilliant Japanese novelist who writes a lot about memory, who even plots in 1996, one year before the creation of the Arab Image Foundation, plots this beautiful idea of a conservation institute that believes in performing objects as opposed to locking them up and putting them on a shelf, trying to save them. You save things by performing it. You save a song by teaching it to your kids. Yeah. So this is the level that I would like to reach with photography today.
So with this exhibition, we really hope that the public gets an more expanded way of thinking about photography in taking photographs, which actually we're bombarded with images daily, and what we do with them, no? How they're stored in our phone, how we share them.
I would add a human's capacity is illimited in seizing. I mean, I don't mind being bombarded with photography. I think future mechanisms would be actually created. In a way, I don't see technology as a threat. On the contrary, maybe. We will find ways to seize all of this.
On that note, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. There's lots of books that I feel that I have to read, and also I've shown your work, Akram, since 2011, and there was a presentation in 2012 at the Liverpool Biennial that now, having heard this talk, I realized was completely wrong, because I saw the way that I presented Madani's work was very much as appropriation. So we have to have a talk about that, because I think that will be interesting for us anyway. But you were touching upon it in the end there, and I see myself as a historian of visual culture, and specifically the image as well. And I'm curious how we, in this current state, I mean, you speak about a potential future state, but how in this current state we attribute value to images. So Madani's image, you know, if it's shown as bodybuilders by Akram Zaatari and it's originally Madani's image, it has a different value than if Madani took it in his studio. And like you said, no one wanted to go to Madani's studio. If Hito Sheryl takes a picture on her Instagram versus a photo that she frames in a gallery, where does the value lie there, and how do we historicize each image and give it an attributed value? Is it really and how do we actually define the space between what is a so-called vernacular photography or a studio photography practice in this day and age versus a fine art photography that has a very different kind of value? And as someone who is acquiring or thinking about this stuff, I find it very difficult to explain sometimes how we attribute value. So maybe you have an idea about how we attribute value, because you were very material in your description. You talked about the back of the image and the discoloration, but you know, how do we attribute value to image in a digital age, say?
I mean, frankly, the value is always becoming. Everything is worthless and everything is worth millions at the same time. It depends what you think you can make out of it. And yes, there is a process of work. This is how I work. This is my work. This is my work is the time that I spend on things to all of a sudden bring something that makes out of them universal. Like the photograph. I always like to bring this example because it's an iconic image. A photograph that is on a first, like surface value, a portrait of a woman, and then there's a scratch on that portrait. When you study the reason, when you want to know why, okay, it's the husband of that woman who went once to the photographer. I'm talking about the Hashim al-Madani photograph of Madame Bakari, Mrs. Bakari. Her name became famous. She is the victim of her husband's jealous mentality. After arguing with the photographer, they decided to ruin the future of that image by scratching it. And then all of a sudden, that defect made the fame of the photograph through my work. Because I'm an anthropologist, a historian, I was asking Madani once about if ever a photograph brought him into trouble. And then he told me this story. And since then, it took me months looking through the archive for that scratched portrait, tiny, small 35 millimeter films. So it's inquiry, curiosity, time. You need to be generous with time. You cannot go from city to another in the world and think that ideas. No, you need to spend time in the same place. Going back to the photographer. Is this the person that you are talking about? Said yes. This is the woman. And from there on, I started identifying other images of her, also scratched in the archive. So they did not only scratch it once. So I always say, okay, if I want to, for me, I authored this work through my work. But is Madani the only author of that image? No, it's the jealous husband is also a co-author if you want to talk about authorship. So authorship is very, very, and value is why is a ruined image all of a sudden more valuable than an image that was safe and was never scratched? So this is the contradiction, but also this is the great thing about life, the great thing about working in the art world. You find people who would listen to what you're saying, and I am really thankful that people are listening to the little stories who are absolutely banal stories. These are banal stories in a city in South Lebanon in the 50s that should, in normal circumstances, not interest anyone in the world. When you make out of them all of a sudden universal stories against which you are seeing the world nowadays, all of a sudden even someone in London that frees art would actually appreciate it and associate value to it if you're talking about financial value. So value is speculative, value is something, I see value in things because I know I can make out of this something else. And I'm sure I missed a lot of opportunities because I did not see the value in other things, and therefore I did not pick while doing research.
Sorry to hog the mic, but just a second brief question, which is that Van Leo features obviously in the exhibition here, and was a studio photographer from Egypt, and it was through. I knew of his work, but it was through your work, and especially Her and Him, Van Leo, which I at the time acquired and showed at the Whitechapel, that I really got to understand this character that you had created for a mythology of your own. And I'm just curious about, do you feel any sense of responsibility of, leaving the foundation? I mean, you have activated, museum directors have said to me, I want to do a Van Leo show, when, and that would never have happened if you hadn't have worked on Van Leo, for example. So do you feel that sense, and if you continue to work with that archive with other photographers, for example, you might create other ruptures, fissures, opportunities for these photographers. So do you feel a sense of responsibility or a sense of sadness or a melancholy about leaving this behind, or what do you see it morphing into? Because really I have always seen AIF as being activated by the artworks that are produced from its kind of contents more than anything else, actually. So that's my question.
Yeah, absolutely. The foundation is not is not leaving this mission. The foundation is still working with artists, hopefully working further with artists. I am leaving the foundation as a member, but I will continue to work with the foundation, hopefully on projects. I just don't want to be confronted with the psychology of the group. Going back to Van Leo, yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones to have interviewed Van Leo on camera in 1998. And since then, I'm looking for other interviews. How sad it is that this person was never interviewed in his life. He told me, I think the second person. He told me, you are the second person to come to my studio, and already he was walking like this. He was too old when I interviewed him, but he told me the first person came to interview him for 15 minutes. I stayed for 4 hours, and. It tells me that's how sad it's there are so many people around us that need to be interviewed, and I have a limited capacity of working on other people's work also, so I need to have choices. But no, I think for the future of the Arab Image Foundation, for the future of my work, or in the same direction, I think this is way much better. Yeah. You will see more works about other people for sure.